It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, I watched my fiancé walk out of the church without looking back, leaving me in a white dress, surrounded by whispers as my sister stepped in to claim everything I had planned for months. If you've ever had someone steal not just your moment but your future, stick with me to the end. And please, before we go any further, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this story, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place and where you're watching from. I read every single one. My name is Veronica Hale and I was engaged to Evan Markell for 4 years. We'd been through the ups and downs, financial struggles, career changes, moving into our first apartment. We weren't perfect, but we were steady, committed. I thought I knew him better than anyone in the world. That morning, I thought I was walking toward a lifetime with the man I loved. The venue was perfect. White roses lined the aisle, sunlight poured through the stained glass, and every detail, from the string quartet to the custom cake, was exactly as I'd imagined since I was a little girl. The only person who could have made me nervous that morning was Mia, my younger sister by 3 years. Mia has always been complicated. She's the kind of person who can smile while she's stealing your thunder. Growing up, she had a way of turning my accomplishments into hers. If I got a lead role in the school play, she would accidentally get sick just before opening night, so the director felt sorry for her and gave her the spotlight. If I worked all summer to buy something for myself, she'd borrow it just once, and somehow it would never come back the same. I thought I'd protected my wedding day from her influence. I kept vendor details private, avoided giving her too much access, and didn't even let her handle my dress. But I underestimated just how far she would go. It started 15 minutes before the ceremony. Evan came into the side room where I was waiting, his face pale, hands trembling. Without saying much, he showed me a message on his phone, an anonymous text with a photo attached. The photo showed me in a dimly lit bar, leaning in close to a man I'd never seen before. The timestamp claimed it was taken 2 nights ago. The message read, "She's been cheating on you. Don't humiliate yourself in front of everyone." My heart stopped. It wasn't me in that picture. The woman had my hair color, my build, but her jawline was different. It was a fake. A bad one, but convincing enough to someone in shock. I tried to explain, but Evan wasn't hearing it. His eyes darted to the door like he couldn't get out fast enough. He slid the ring into my palm and whispered, "I can't do this," before walking out. I didn't chase him. I didn't cry. I just stood there, frozen in my gown, as the organ music died mid-note and the silence spread through the church. And then Mia walked in. Her hair was perfect, makeup flawless, wearing a dress that somehow matched the bridal color scheme. She looked at me with a mix of pity and something else, satisfaction. "Over. I'm so sorry," she said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. "But maybe we can still salvage the day? Everyone's here, the flowers, the food. It would be such a waste." She didn't wait for my answer. Within minutes, she was talking to the pastor, the planner, the band, telling them I'd given her permission to turn this into a celebration for the family. Before I could even process what was happening, she was at the altar holding my bouquet, smiling at my guests. They clapped. My own relatives clapped for her. My mother patted my arm and said, "At least someone can make the best of it," as though Mia's hijacking of my wedding was some kind of noble act. I slipped out the side door while they cheered her on. That night, I slept on my best friend's couch. I didn't eat, didn't cry, just stared at the ceiling, replaying every second of the day. And slowly the pieces started to fit together. Mia's suspicious errands in the weeks before. Her insistence on helping with guest arrangements. The way she'd been overly curious about my rehearsal dinner schedule. She had set me up. Over the next few days, I confirmed what I already knew in my gut. The photo was old, doctored, and pulled from a night at a bar I hadn't been to in years. The man in the image was a stranger. Mia had found it, altered it, and sent it to Evan right before the ceremony, counting on him to panic and walk. And he did. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation would only give her more attention. The one thing she thrived on. Instead, I went quiet. I started taking notes. I listed every person who sided with her, every detail she reused from my plans, every crack in her perfect facade. 3 months later, she had a new man. Daniel Archer. Handsome, successful, the kind of guy who turned heads when he walked into a room. From the way Mia paraded him around, I knew she was serious. I also knew Daniel was nothing like Evan. He was observant, grounded, and respected honesty. I made sure to be friendly but distant. I didn't flirt, didn't meddle, just let him see who I was in comparison to her. The late arrivals. The overblown stories. The way she twisted the truth so often it started to fray at the edges. By the time they got engaged, Daniel and I had developed a quiet, mutual respect. He'd seen enough of Mia to know she wasn't the saint she played in public. And that was when I realized my opportunity. I wouldn't just confront Mia. I wouldn't shout, accuse, or try to win back the wedding day she stole. No, I would take something she valued far more. And I would do it in a way so clean, so undeniable that no one could call it sabotage. Because some betrayals deserve more than an apology. They deserve a lesson they'll never forget. And Mia was about to get hers. Daniel Archer wasn't just another one of Mia's perfect catches. He was the kind of man people noticed in a room for all the right reasons. Quiet confidence, easy manners, a presence that didn't demand attention but earned it anyway. He had a reputation for being decent in a world where that word was almost quaint. And because of that, he was the one person in Mia's life I didn't want to see turned into collateral damage. Still, I couldn't forget the way she'd smiled at me from the altar on my wedding day, as if I'd handed her a gift. That smile had burned itself into my memory. She didn't just take my moment. She enjoyed watching me lose it. So I did something most people wouldn't expect. I didn't avoid Daniel. I made sure I was around. It started at family gatherings, holidays, birthdays, Sunday dinners at our mother's house. I was polite, warm, but never overly friendly. I let him draw his own comparisons between us. Where Mia arrived late with elaborate excuses, I showed up early and helped set the table. Where Mia made every conversation about herself, I asked him about his work, his hobbies, his running routes. I listened. Daniel noticed. He noticed more than Mia realized. One Sunday, while Mia was in the kitchen loudly critiquing the salad my mother made, Daniel sat down across from me on the porch. "You know," he said, leaning back in the chair, "I think you might be the only person in this family who doesn't want something from me." I raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" He shrugged. "With Mia I don't know. There's always a pitch. A story. A reason to impress. You're different." I gave him a small smile. Maybe I just like people for who they are. He looked at me for a long moment as though weighing whether to say more, then shook his head and changed the subject. But the seed was planted. Mia, of course, was oblivious. She was too busy planning their engagement party, which she talked about as though it were the royal wedding. She called me one afternoon to ask for my input on decor, which really meant fishing for compliments. "It's going to be perfect," she gushed. "White orchids everywhere, champagne tower, and Daniel's favorite jazz trio playing live. You'll see, it'll make up for, well, you know." She never said the words, "your ruined wedding." He didn't have to. The smirk in her voice told me she still considered it her crowning achievement. That night I started my plan. I wasn't going to try to seduce Daniel. That would make me no better than her. My revenge wasn't about romance. It was about truth. I wanted Daniel to see Mia the way I did without me having to say a word. And once he saw it, he wouldn't be able to unsee it. The first opportunity came at their engagement party. The venue was gorgeous. High ceilings, soft lighting, music drifting through the air. I wore a deep emerald dress that made me stand out just enough, but not in a way that screamed for attention. When Daniel saw me, he smiled warmly and crossed the room to greet me. "I'm glad you came," he said. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. And I meant it. This was the first night of the rest of my plan. Throughout the evening, I noticed small things. Mia snapping at the caterer because the hors d'oeuvres weren't plated like the photo. Mia ignoring Daniel's uncle to take selfies with her friends. Mia laughing a little too loudly whenever she told the story of how they met by fate. A story I knew she'd edited more than a film trailer. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. Daniel's eyes followed these moments, and each time, I saw his smile falter just slightly. The moment that sealed it happened near the end of the night. Daniel was talking with two colleagues when Mia swept in, looped her arm through his and interrupted. "Babe, I need you to tell the story about how you proposed," she said. Daniel hesitated. "I'm in the middle of..." "Now, babe," she insisted, tightening her grip. He excused himself from his colleagues, but I caught the look they exchanged. A mix of amusement and discomfort. Daniel launched into the story, but Mia kept cutting in, correcting tiny details, making sure the punchlines belonged to her. By the end, the proposal story wasn't his at all. It was hers. The next day I sent him a message. Nothing dramatic. Just a thank you for inviting me and a compliment on the party. I made no mention of Mia. He replied almost instantly, thanking me for being a breath of fresh air. From that point on, our conversations grew. Always friendly, always appropriate. But with each exchange, the gap between the version of Mia he thought he knew and the one he was starting to see widened. Meanwhile, Mia's behavior became more erratic. She complained about Daniel being distant, though I knew it was just him quietly pulling back. She started posting more about their relationship online. Lavish dinners, romantic getaways, all curated for likes. I recognized the signs. He was performing, not living. I stayed patient. Revenge, real revenge, isn't quick. It's careful. It waits for the perfect moment when the truth is undeniable. And I could feel that moment getting closer. One evening, months later, Daniel called me out of the blue. "I need to ask you something," he said. "And I want the truth." My pulse quickened. "All right. Did Mia ever do something to you? Something big? Because sometimes I get the feeling there's history there, but you're too polite to say it." I paused, letting the silence stretch just enough. "Daniel," I said softly, "Mia and I have our differences. But if you're asking whether she's capable of hurting someone close to her, I think you already know the answer." He didn't respond right away. But when he did, his voice was low, certain. "I think I do." That was the moment I knew the tide had turned. Not because I'd convinced him, but because he'd convinced himself. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of Mia's downfall. Mia always thought she could control a narrative. Whether it was about her job, her relationships, or even a childhood argument, she had a way of rewriting history in her favor. But what she didn't realize was that narratives have a shelf life. And once the truth starts leaking out, it spreads faster than her curated lies. By the time spring rolled around, Daniel's shift was no longer subtle. At family gatherings, he sat further from her, his eyes flickering toward me in quiet acknowledgement but never lingering too long. When Mia spoke, he didn't hang on every word like before. Instead, he'd check his phone, refill his drink, or redirect the conversation to someone else. The first public crack came at our cousin's engagement party. Mia arrived in a glittering gold dress, beautiful but far more suited for a red carpet event than an intimate family celebration. She swept into the room as if she owned it, clutching Daniel's arm so tightly it looked more like a claim than a gesture of affection. I was chatting with our aunt near the buffet when Mia's voice cut through the noise. "Veronica, you didn't bring a date again?" she said, loud enough for half the room to hear. The old me might have stammered or laughed it off. But no. I simply smiled. "No, Mia. I figured I'd leave that kind of performance to you." A few people chuckled, lightly, but it was enough. Daniel's mouth twitched as if he were suppressing a smile. Mia's eyes narrowed just for a moment before she plastered on another one of her too bright grins. Later that night, I found myself outside on the terrace, sipping champagne under the string lights. Daniel joined me, his hands in his pockets. "You know," he said, "I don't think I've ever seen anyone hold their own against Mia like that." I shrugged. "I just answer the question I'm asked." He laughed. Really laughed. And for a moment I caught a glimpse of what he must have been like before Mia began shaping him into a prop for her social persona. The weeks that followed were a quiet study in subtle sabotage. I didn't set traps, I just let Mia be Mia. When she made promises she didn't keep, I made sure Daniel knew, gently, innocently. If she exaggerated a story, I'd add a small, factual detail that undercut her narrative without making it look intentional. One evening, Mia hosted a dinner for some of Daniel's business associates. She'd insisted on cooking herself, claiming it would show her domestic side. But halfway through the evening, it was clear she was in over her head. Burnt appetizers, undercooked chicken, and a cake that collapsed in the center. I had been invited as extra help, but I stayed in the background until Daniel came into the kitchen, frustration written across his face. Without a word, I rolled up my sleeves and salvaged what I could, replating the food, whipping up a quick pasta, making sure the guest had something edible. By the time the evening ended, the associates were complimenting Daniel on that wonderful meal, while Mia took the credit. I didn't correct them, but I caught Daniel's eyes over the table. He knew. The real turning point, though, came at the charity gala. It was one of those events Mia loved. Photographers, champagne, a reason to wear a dress that cost more than most people's rent. She had been on the planning committee, which meant she was itching to be recognized as the star of the evening. Halfway through, the MC began announcing the donors and contributors. Mia's name was called and she strutted to the stage, waving like a queen. Then the MC called another name, mine. I hadn't told anyone, but I'd made a significant anonymous donation in honor of our late grandmother. It wasn't about outshining her. It was about making a statement. When the MC read my name, there was polite applause, until they added that my contribution was the largest of the night. Mia froze on stage. The smile faltered just enough for the front row to notice. I stood, accepted the applause with a calm nod and sat back down. Daniel's gaze lingered on me from across the room, and when Mia returned to their table, he didn't even pretend to listen to her chatter. The aftermath was predictable. Mia started calling me more often, not to reconcile but to pry. Where did you get the money for that donation? Are you seeing someone? Why didn't you tell me? I answered with vague politeness, giving her nothing she could use. Daniel, on the other hand, started calling me for different reasons. Sometimes it was for advice about work. Other times it was just to talk. The conversations were easy, natural, and never about Mia unless he brought her up. And when he did, it was usually to voice a frustration he hadn't dared to say aloud before. She makes everything about her, he said once. It's exhausting. I didn't say I know. I just let the silence do the talking. By early summer, the shift was undeniable. Daniel was spending more weekends away from Mia, often under the guise of work trips that I knew were part escape, part self-preservation. Mia responded with a barrage of social media posts. Smiling selfies, romantic captions, strategically staged photos. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect couple. But I'd seen enough to know the facade was cracking. And I was ready. Because the final act of my plan wasn't about making Mia jealous or even taking Daniel from her outright. It was about giving her the same kind of public, irreversible humiliation she'd given me. Except mine would be wrapped so neatly in truth that she couldn't spin it into a story where she was the victim. And the opportunity was coming sooner than she thought. By midsummer, Mia was starting to sweat, though she'd never admit it. On the surface, she was still posting flawless pictures of her and Daniel on weekend getaways, smiling like they were in the honeymoon phase. But I knew better. I'd seen the way Daniel's smiles in those photos never quite reached his eyes, the way his body angled ever so slightly away from her, like a man trying to be polite while longing for space. The gap between them had grown and Mia could feel it. She responded the only way she knew how, by tightening her grip. She planned elaborate date nights, surprise trips, and bought expensive gifts, all while insisting on sharing every moment online. But her efforts were backfiring. Daniel wasn't impressed, he was irritated. It was at our mother's birthday dinner that I saw the first sign of Mia's unraveling in public. We were at a long table in a busy restaurant, the air filled with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Mia was across from Daniel, recounting a story about their recent trip to Napa. And of course, she said, flipping her hair, I had to tell the sommelier how to properly pair the wine. Daniel interrupted, his voice calm but edged. Actually, Mia, the sommelier was right. You just didn't want to listen. A silence fell over the table. Mia's smile froze, her knuckles whitening around her fork. She laughed a little too loudly. Oh, well, you know me, I just like things a certain way. But the damage was done. My aunt raised an eyebrow, my mother shifted uncomfortably, and Daniel simply went back to his meal. The tension between them was becoming impossible to ignore. And I decided it was time to start planting seeds outside the family. I began with small, harmless truths, things Mia had done that were easy to verify. I'd mentioned to mutual acquaintances how she accidentally double-booked Daniel's birthday with a spa weekend for herself, or how she once made him miss an important meeting because she insisted they stop for a last-minute shopping trip. I never embellished, I didn't need to. The truth was damning enough. Word travels fast in our social circle, especially when it's wrapped in casual conversation. By the time Daniel's company hosted its summer charity auction, there were whispers about Mia being high maintenance and difficult. The auction was where I decided to set the stage for the final act. It was a black tie event at a waterfront hotel, the kind of place where the champagne flows freely and everyone's watching everyone else. I arrived in a sleek navy gown, simple but perfectly tailored. Mia, of course, showed up in a sequined red dress that sparkled under every light. She made sure to drag Daniel around like a trophy, introducing him to anyone who would listen. Midway through the evening, the auctioneer announced the highlight item, a private Mediterranean yacht trip for two. The room buzzed with excitement as bidding began. Daniel raised his paddle early, clearly interested. Mia leaned in and whispered something to him, something that made his jaw tighten. The bidding climbed higher, and just when it seemed Daniel might bow out, I raised my paddle. All eyes turned to me. Daniel's expression flickered with surprise, then curiosity. Mia's, on the other hand, darkened like a storm cloud. It was a risky move, but I had no intention of winning the trip. My goal was to push Daniel just enough that he made the choice himself. And he did. He outbid me decisively, the auctioneer slamming the gavel with a cheer from the crowd. But here's the thing. Mia wasn't smiling. She leaned in to hiss something in his ear, and he didn't even look at her. He just excused himself and walked away, to me. Trying to bankrupt me? He joked, though there was a glint in his eye. Just keeping things interesting, I said lightly. He laughed, but then his expression turned serious. Veronica, can I ask you something? I nodded. If you knew someone was lying to you, not once, not twice, but for years, would you want them to admit it, or would you rather just find out on your own? I held his gaze. If it were me, I'd want the truth to come out, no matter how ugly it was. He looked at me for a long moment before saying quietly, "That's what I thought." Then he walked back toward the crowd, leaving Mia glaring at me from across the room. From that night on, things moved faster. Daniel stopped defending Mia when she snapped at people. He started correcting her in front of others, small things at first, but enough for people to notice. And Mia, desperate to regain control, started making mistakes. Ones I didn't even have to orchestrate. She picked a fight with Daniel at a friend's barbecue, loud enough for half the guests to hear. She posted a rant on social media about disloyal people that had everyone speculating. And then, in a move that would prove fatal to her image, she confronted me directly in front of Daniel at a Sunday dinner. "You've been trying to turn him against me," she accused, her voice trembling with rage. The table went silent. Daniel set down his fork and looked at her with something I hadn't seen before, coldness. "Mia," he said evenly, "Veronica hasn't said a word to me about you. Everything I know, I've seen for myself." Her mouth opened, then closed. She had no script for this moment. She looked around the table, but no one came to her defense. That was when I knew the end was near. By the time autumn came, Mia's perfect facade was cracking wide open. The whispers in our social circle had grown into quiet, knowing looks. Daniel was no longer the smiling, compliant partner at her side. He was distant, measured, and most importantly, watching her in a way that told me he was collecting his own evidence. The final stage of my plan needed a stage worthy of the downfall, and fate handed it to me in the form of our cousin Lauren's wedding. A grand, over-the-top affair at a historic estate. Exactly the kind of place Mia loved to treat like her runway. She was a bridesmaid, I was a guest. Daniel, of course, was attending with her. The day began innocently enough. Pictures in the garden, champagne flutes clinking, guests laughing in the autumn sun. Mia floated around in her silk gown, greeting guests as if she were hosting the event herself. She was in her element. Until she wasn't. During the reception, speeches began. The maid of honors was heartfelt and sweet. The best man's had everyone laughing. Then Lauren, the bride, took the microphone to thank everyone. "I want to give special thanks to a few people who made today possible," she said. "Veronica, thank you for stepping in when my florist canceled last minute. I heard you not only helped find a replacement but covered the difference yourself." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My contribution hadn't been public knowledge. I smiled politely and nodded. Lauren continued. "And Daniel, thank you for helping with the logistics when the venue's power went out last night. You were a lifesaver." As applause broke out, I glanced at Mia. Her smile had tightened. She hated not being the center of gratitude. Then it happened. The DJ announced it was time for the bride and groom's first dance. As the couple twirled on the floor, Daniel approached me at my table. "Dance with me," he said quietly. I hesitated, glancing toward Mia, who was deep in conversation with another guest. "Daniel." "Just one dance," he insisted. It was a slow song, soft and understated. We moved easily like we'd done it 100 times. We didn't speak much, just exchanged a few quiet jokes, shared a few smiles. But the effect was explosive. I could feel eyes on us. Not because we were doing anything inappropriate but because the connection was visible. When the song ended, I thanked him and returned to my seat. Mia's chair was empty. She reappeared 10 minutes later, face flushed, dragging Daniel by the arm. The music faded slightly as her voice rose above the chatter. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" she snapped. "Dancing with her in front of everyone?" A hush fell over the tables nearby. Daniel pulled his arm free. "Mia, it was a dance. You're making a scene. You've been making a fool of me for months," she shot back. "Everyone can see it, how you look at her, how you talk to her." "That's enough," Daniel said, his voice sharp now. But Mia wasn't done. She turned on me. "And you've been playing innocent, but I know exactly what you're doing. You've been trying to steal him from me just like you stole my wedding day?" I asked, my voice calm but clear enough for the surrounding tables to hear. The silence was instant and deafening. Someone at the next table actually gasped. Mia's mouth fell open. She stammered, "That's not." Daniel cut in, his voice low and cold. "Mia, is it true?" She looked at him, then at the crowd, searching for a lifeline. It wasn't like that." "It's exactly like that," I said, still calm. "You lied, you manipulated, and you made sure I was humiliated in front of everyone I loved. And now you're angry because the truth is catching up to you." Daniel stared at her for a long, heavy moment before stepping back. "I think we're done here." The words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes darted around, realizing that every person in the room had just witnessed her being publicly confronted and abandoned. She tried to save face, forcing a brittle laugh. "Fine. Walk away. You'll regret it." But Daniel didn't look back. He left the reception entirely. A few minutes later I followed, not because I wanted to leave but because I knew staying would turn me into the villain in her rewritten version of events. Outside, I found him by the fountain, hands in his pockets, looking more relieved than heartbroken. "You all right?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "I should have seen it sooner. Thank you for not forcing it, for letting me get there on my own." I smiled faintly. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs space to breathe. We stood there for a long moment, the muffled music from the reception drifting through the cool night air. And in that moment I knew I'd done what I set out to do, not just to reclaim my dignity, but to make sure Mia would never again be able to twist the truth without someone there to set it straight. Mia's fall from grace wasn't a dramatic one-day implosion. It was quieter, slower, but far more devastating. In the weeks after Lauren's wedding, the ripples from that confrontation spread fast. People talked. They replayed the scene at their tables, recounted Daniel's words, and whispered about the wedding day revelation I'd dropped like a pebble into still water. By the end of the month, Mia's version of events didn't stand a chance. Not because I worked to discredit her, but because I didn't have to. The truth was already doing the work. Daniel moved out 2 days after the wedding. He stayed at a friend's place for a while, and though he didn't tell me everything right away, I knew Mia's attempts to win him back were relentless. He showed me a few of her texts, long rambling messages alternating between begging and blaming. He didn't respond to most of them. When he did, it was only to make logistics clear about the belongings he still needed to pick up. Meanwhile, Mia began losing her social footing. Invitations stopped arriving. Friends she'd counted on for sympathy started avoiding her, claiming they were busy or had to reschedule. The charity committees she loved to boast about didn't renew her for the next season. No one wanted the drama. One afternoon about 3 weeks later, I stopped by my favorite cafe. Daniel was there, sitting at a corner table with a laptop and a coffee. He looked lighter. Not just physically, but in the way he held himself, as though a weight had been lifted. He smiled when he saw me. "Veronica, sit with me." I did. We chatted about small things first. The weather, a movie he'd seen, the book I was reading. But eventually the conversation shifted. "You know," he said, "I keep replaying that night in my head. Not just the wedding, but everything. The way she was with you. The way she twisted things." I sipped my coffee. "It's her nature. She doesn't know how to live without controlling the story. And you," he said, studying me, "you never tried to force me to see it. You just let me find my way there." "I didn't need to force you," I said softly. "I knew you'd see it when you were ready." That seemed to stay with him. He looked down at his coffee, then back at me with a small, thoughtful smile. I'd like to see you more. Outside of family events. It wasn't a declaration, but it was a door opening. One I wasn't sure yet if I wanted to walk through. My revenge had never been about taking Daniel. It was about reclaiming what Mia stole and making sure she couldn't rewrite the ending. But the idea of seeing him, really seeing him, on my own terms, that was a thought I was willing to entertain. Over the next few months, our lives moved forward. Daniel and I crossed paths more often, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose. We went for coffee, for walks in the park, for dinners that lingered late into the night. He was careful, respectful, and patient. Mia, on the other hand, was unraveling faster than even I had anticipated. She tried dating again, but word of her temper and controlling nature made the rounds quickly. Men she met through friends never called back. She attempted to launch a small event planning business, but her reputation in the community worked against her. Within 3 months it folded. I never gloated. Not publicly. That would have cheapened it. Instead, I let her stew in the silence that followed her wherever she went. Silence, I've learned, can be more suffocating than words. The last time I saw her face to face was at the grocery store. She was in the produce aisle wearing oversized sunglasses and a scowl. I might have walked past without a word, but she stopped me. "You think you won," she said, her voice low but tight. I tilted my head. "Mia, this was never a game. But if you want to call it that, no, I didn't win. You lost. All by yourself." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't reply. She just turned and walked away, her cart squeaking against the tile. That night Daniel called. "Dinner?" he asked. We went to a small Italian place neither of us had tried before. Over pasta and wine we talked about the future. Not in concrete plans, but in the easy, open-ended way two people do when they're comfortable in each other's company. As we left, he slipped his hand into mine. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. Not the weight of my revenge, that had already been carried out, but the weight of something new, something I could choose for myself without Mia's shadow hanging over it. Revenge, I realized, isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about reclamation. About taking back the narrative someone tried to steal and writing your own ending. Mine was just beginning.